I think there's two things that I was raised with that have made me part of me. One is I was raised around storytellers. My father was a theater, radio, and television guy, and we hung around other theater people, and I got to know that art form. And he was a big reader. My mother was a reader. I'm encouraged to read. So I kind of learned storytelling as a kid. And then I would say the intersection of that with faith, in a belief in a higher being, in my case, follower of Jesus, committed Christian, and a belief that there's a bigger power at work, and sort of understand that successes and failures aren't just all about me, but about bigger things. So I take those two things together, and I would say those are, pretty informing about who I turned out to be. A story, though, that would say, part of what turned me into me would be, so I came out of high school, and I had all my eggs in one basket. I applied for a Lilly scholarship at Wabash College. The Lilly scholarship from the Lilly Endowment was a pretty cool thing. It was a 5-year program, 4 years, all paid for, 1 year over in Europe or someplace else in the world. 12 of those were given each year, and I was chosen to be number 13. The interesting part about that was on my application, it talked about what would you like to be in your life if you could be anything. And I originally had written that I would like to own a chain of radio stations. And I had built the whole story out, why, different formats, why I want, how I would do it. And I showed it to my father. And my father said, that's not thinking big enough. And I said, really? And he says, no, you got to think bigger than that. You got to be, something bigger. So I went back, I sat and I looked at it, and I came back and I said, I'd like to be a United States Senator. So I wrote the whole thing about how to be a United States Senator. And I was not chosen for that scholarship. My lesson out of that was something that I've held true to today. And in fact, I live by a motto that there'll only be one of you for all time. Fearlessly be yourself. I was not fearlessly myself in that process, because if you think about the number of applications that they got, how many people probably said they'd like to be a United States Senator? Probably a fair amount. How many people do you think actually said that they would want to own a chain of radio stations? Probably nobody but me. And had I stayed true to myself, maybe I would have ended up with Wabash, a scholarship to Wabash from Lilly. I don't know. But I think the authenticity of your story and being true to yourself was something that I've held with me the rest of my life. And, when people actually try to talk me out of, presenting myself one way versus another, I do that. I'm very, very circumspect. I step back and say, boy, I had that experience and I don't want to miss that again. Probably the life-changing moment for me was the decision to leave PepsiCo after 10 years and go to Electronic Arts. And you have to understand, this is the late 90s, and video gaming was not what video gaming is today. Video gaming was still sort of reserved for the nerd in the corner. My wife and I left both of us very successful careers at PepsiCo. Hers the assistant to the chairman of Pepsi. Me with 10 years in, sort of like one of the top 5 HR guys on his way. We took a left-hand turn. And the reason being is because the headhunter said to me, and he reminded me of my story. He said, this was from Heidrick and Struggles. He goes, you've consistent every single time we have called you. You've said the only thing that's going to get me out of PepsiCo is either entertainment, media, or maybe high tech if there's a component of it. And he said, I'm looking at it, and he goes, anybody who ever called. And he goes, you've been so consistent about that. He goes, I think I have the whole thing in one package for you. And I listened to that, and I said, wow, that is me, and this could be me. And so I pursued it, and that was life-changing. I very much value music. I'm the chairman of the Grammy Foundation because I value music. and I understand the power of music. And so I show up at EA. So I recognize that the first song on Madden Football gets 1 billion impressions. 1 billion impressions. By the time people play it over and over and over and over, and people share their copies, and you're sitting around and playing together, it's 1 billion impressions. And I just started saying it's the most valuable piece of real estate in the music industry. And I just kept saying it over and over and over until finally my boss, the CEO, said, "Well, why don't you go do something about it? Go hire somebody for this." And so I went out and sourced a guy named Steve Schnurr, and I sat down with him, and he'd come out of Capitol Records, and he's an early MTV guy. He'd been a music supervisor, trying to reinvent himself. And I sat with him, and he goes, "Why would I want to get into video games? Why would I want to do this?" I said, "Steve, look, I can't promise you I'm going to make you rich. I can't actually promise you that you're going to be totally successful inside the company because you're going to start something new." I said, "But if you do come in and do this, within the next 5 years, you will be one of the 5 most influential people in the music industry. That's what I promise you." And sure enough, that exactly happened, and the whole model changed, and music, all of a sudden labels were coming to the video game guys instead of the other way around, and it became a great success story for the industry. It's a lot of hubris actually to stand up and say, "Well, this is the most technology advanced campaign of all time." Well, every one of them better be that, otherwise you lose. So sure, we were better in 2012 or 2008, but we did something unique in the midst of that. We looked at the technology community and said, there's 2 things this group can really do for us. One is it can raise a lot of money. So there's no doubt about it, it can raise a lot of money. But secondly, and more importantly, is if we've got a couple hundred people who are in Chicago working on the digital campaign, what could a couple hundred of the luminaries inside of the industry do to assist them? And then secondly, what if there were 10,000 plus people behind them who were taking all of that cool stuff and turning around and using their livelihood and their passions to be a part of the movement to support that? And we took those 3 things and put them together. Fundraising, this support, very high level, this broad-based membership, and literally did some extraordinary things. The president was obviously reelected, which is the big win. But at the same time, you can read sort of ad nauseum at this point about, how the digital technology stuff worked. But I will give you an example that we decided within about a 24-hour period. I got a call from the head of the digital part of the campaign that says, "What do you think about the president going on Reddit?" And I said, my first reaction was, it's an awesome idea. My second reaction is, it's high-stakes poker. Because if you don't do Reddit right, you get flamed badly, and then you could end up being, as they call Woody Harrelson, pulling a Woody, because, if you do it bad, you're in trouble. So, high-risk poker, but, wow, street cred, awesome, so get that input. A few hours later, get an email. "We're going tomorrow afternoon, 4 o'clock Eastern. Gather up your folks." So I gather up my folks, the biggest influencers that we have in the Twitter community at that point. It got bigger and bigger as we got closer to the campaign. But, at 4 o'clock Eastern on a Wednesday afternoon, I pushed a button that represented 7 million Twitter followers that said, "Go to Reddit right now." And I was doing that along with other people, and it was sort of a chain. And for the first time, Reddit crashed. Never had crashed before. And it took another 5 to 7 minutes to get the site back up. And then for the 30 minutes the president was on, he had 5 million uniques constantly pounding on Reddit to try to get in to talk to him. And then the next day, there wasn't a media outlet in the world, really, that didn't have someplace on the front page or in the front story about the president being on Reddit and crashing the internet. And, it's how have today, social media, and combining that with a belief and a cause, and then allowing people to be engaged where they feel like their contribution is valued. It's an amazing, amazing tool, and I think we're only at the cusp of it. But what we did in 2012 with Technology for Obama was considered pretty disruptive, and really made a difference. If you've got something that you want to push or propose or get out there that's disruptive or runs against the grain, the first thing you have to do is you have to build your own personal credibility for that. You're the person that you're talking to or the people you're talking to understand where you're coming from. They trust you. They believe in you. They know that your motives are pure for the objective that you're putting out there, and you'll get attention. So I think that's a big piece of it, and you don't build that personal credibility overnight. I mean, that's a constant deposit into the bank, and more deposits than withdrawals. So that that the ledger is certainly more on your side than not. I think the other piece is that there needs to be a consistency about who you are around an unhealthy satisfaction with the status quo. So, if you just show up one day and you go with the flow and everything's good, show up one day and go, no, I think we should go do it a different way. That's so out of character. But if you're a person that sort of builds a model of who you are, sort of a healthy dissatisfaction with the status quo, I think you have a better chance. When I was growing up in PepsiCo, very traditional, blue suit, red tie, white shirt, no, not rusty. Not rusty. I think that's a big piece of who you are. So the authenticity and an understanding of kind of who you are. And then I think the third piece is just having great relationships. So at the end of the day, it basically comes down to one or two people have to be influenced to make change. And if you don't have a great relationship with those people and they don't trust you, it goes nowhere. And so now some people are really great at stepping into the room and you build an automatic trust. People just like them, and those are God-given things. But most of us have to work pretty hard at that. We have to spend time with people. We have to give of ourselves to give back. It's the rule of reciprocation, and we have to help others so that someday they will help us. If you ignore all that, you will be the guy at the table and listens to. And that's, for some people, that's fun to be. It's not a place that I wanted it for me. I think the most critical thing and societal thing for us as to pay attention to and learn is inclusiveness and acceptance. And we have spent in the workplace, in our education process, we've spent a lot of time on diversification of thought, diversification of who we are as we show up with our experiences and our backgrounds and culturally, and all that's important. And we need to still focus on that. But the idea of inclusiveness and acceptance, it's a part of our societal discourse and dialogue that's been lost. Instead of starting from the place of, Bill, you've got something good to say, instead we're starting from a place of, I got to figure out, before I listen to you, how I'm going to respond against what you had to say. And there's lots of things driving that. It's the political process, it's the media, it's all of those things. It's literally the fact that we now communicate in 140 characters, because at 140 characters, it's really hard to be thoughtful. It's really hard to be positive. It's really hard to be encouraging. It's extremely easy to be cynical. It's extremely easy to tear down something in 140 characters. And so we have to focus on the importance of inclusion and the importance of acceptance of different ideas and different thoughts, and then stop for a second before we respond and think through what is it that we really want to say that can further the idea versus kill the idea. When I was at EA and we were building out our strategic roadmap, and certainly we wanted to be number one in the world in our products. We wanted to be number one on the PC, on the consoles, and number one online. And I was the guy sitting at the table saying, well, what about our people and what about our talent? And I just boldly threw out, we should be the number one people company in the world. And the level of cynicism was pretty high, around the boardroom table, which was like, well, gosh, even if we knew that, how could we get how could we measure it? And how could we do that? I said, well, this is one of those ones where you take the flyer on it and you know it when you get there. And people will tell us, and people will tell us when we're not. And so I fought pretty hard for that, and ended up including it under the vision of the company to be the greatest entertainment company ever. And I was pretty proud of where we ended up on that journey. Not without some huge speed bumps, not without some huge problems like labor issues around software engineers and overtime and how hard do you work people to make entertainment products and all those kind of things. But underlying that would have been a lot worse, let me tell you, if you didn't have this idea of, I'm trying to hold myself accountable, trying to hold others accountable for trying to create a culture that does allow people to reach their full potential. And so, and I think that, again, it kind of comes all the way back around. It takes, courage to sort of push forward on something like that.